Dr. Christopher Sebastian Parker is the Stuart A. Shinegold Professor of Social Justice and Political Science in the Department of Political Science at the University of Washington. He's the author of several books, and his work has appeared or been featured in many major news outlets. And he has also appeared on MSNBC, PBS, C-SPAN, and the History Channel. Dr. Lance Bennett is Emeritus Professor of Communication and Political Science at the University of Washington and Senior Research Fellow at the Center for Journalism, Media, and Democracy at UW. He is the author of 12 books, most recently Communicating the Future, Solutions for Environment, Economy, and Democracy. His work focuses on restoring democracy and creating economies better adapted to the environmental crisis. After a long career in journalism, Kenan Block currently heads up Kenan Block Media and Communications, a firm that helps clients tell their stories. His award-winning journalism career spanned over a dozen years in Washington, D.C., covering politics and national affairs for the PBS NewsHour and later for MSNBC. He was part of the team that launched MSNBC, serving as the chief Washington producer for The News with Brian Williams. Block was also a founding board member of Town Hall Seattle. Please join me in welcoming Christopher Parker, Lance Bennett, and Kenan Block.
Well, thank you very much, Candace. And I want to thank everybody who's joining us tonight. It's a real thrill to be part of this. I have a special affinity, obviously, for Town Hall, but most of all, this is going to be a phenomenal conversation tonight. You got a bit of an introduction to these two wise men we're going to be talking to about one of the most extraordinary and timely events of modern American history, the entire MAGA movement and the now infamous January 6th riots at the Capitol. But I just want to expand a little bit on first Professor Lance Bennett. Lance is widely recognized as one of the chief scholars on this nexus between communication and democracy, which is profoundly timely. As was mentioned earlier, his most recent book is Communicating the Future. It's solutions for the environment, the economy, and democracy. A really insightful read, and I highly recommend it.
Got the books backwards.
Up. Thank you. So actually, we're gonna, and the book you just saw, The Disinformation Age, Politics, Technology, and Disruptive Communication in the United States, Cambridge University Press book. And a nice aside, not only is that profoundly timely, but that book is available to anyone for free online. So if you want to go search it out, I would encourage you to do that. And Chris Parker, Professor Christian Sebastian Parker, has become a really close friend, a remarkable guy. And Chris, when it comes to an expertise on right-wing movements in America, is really unparalleled in his research and his knowledge. Chris, one of his early books, Fighting for Democracy, Black Veterans and the Struggle Against White Supremacy in the Post-War South, is excellent. And what you're seeing on the screen now, his second book, Change They Can't Believe in, the Tea Party and Revolutionary Politics in America, from Princeton University. This book is a must read. Here, Chris really does crack the code of not just the Tea Party, but what in many ways is the foundation for Trumpism. And Chris is now working on a new book, The Great White Hope, Donald Trump, Race and the Crisis of American Democracy. So without further ado, one of the great things about having Chris and Lance with us tonight, they're old friends and colleagues. And if I could point out that Chris has done some groundbreaking research he's going to start off tonight and share with us into MAGA. And what I think what is particularly significant about Chris's work and research is we are hearing from so damn many pundits these days with lots of opinion about Trumpism, what happened on January 6th, who are these people, what's going on with the Republican Party. And a lot of it is just based on conjecture. The beauty of Chris's work is it's based on hard data. And so, Chris, if you could start off by explaining a little bit about the research and data you have that includes post-January 6th research into these MAGA folks, and then explain a bit about what your findings, which run against a lot of the conventional wisdom. So without further ado, Chris, welcome.
Thank you, Kenan. Good to be here with you again. Can't believe it was November, the last time we were together here on Town Hall. And Lance, my colleague, I should say my senior colleague, even though he doesn't look it, Lance is 27 years ahead of me. So there you go, Lance. Anyway, Lance and I are good friends. And he and his wonderful wife are kind enough. They have a place in Berlin. Whenever I'm over there, I hang out with them. So Lance is my dude. Feeds me well and gets me drunk. So, okay. All right. So what Kenan was talking about is a study a colleague of mine and I, her name is Rachel Bloom at the University of Oklahoma. We wanted to study the MAGA movement. That is to say, you know, that's the acronym for Make America Great Again movement. And so we just happen to have the good fortune, I think, well, for us at least as researchers, good fortune to have gone into the field and collected the initial wave of responses during the last week of 2020. And we were good with that. We were great. We were going to go back and re-interview these people again, but we didn't realize it was going to be so soon. So the Capitol riots happened, January 6th, boom, we're in the field again, because we wanted to find out whether or not that there was any change, you know, from their attitudes and dispositions before and after the riots. And it may be unreasonable to believe or may surprise you that, you know, the MAGA movement is not all Republicans. It is composed also of independents, I'd say roughly a third. And so what we found is, before I show you some slides, what we found is most of the movement really happened among these independents who were Trump supporters before the riots, and then they moved away from him after the riots. And then not surprisingly, Mike Pence's his approval rating dropped 50% from before and after. I mean, that comes as no shock to us because it's like, okay, wait, well, tell me something I don't already know. I can see that. Well, it's kind of one thing to conjecture about something, as Kenan was saying, but it's another thing to see hard data on it. Now, I'm not going to show you that data right now. What I am going to do, I'm going to show you a little bit right now of the composition of the MAGA movement. So if we look at the key characteristics of MAGA supporters, I mean, no big surprises here. Lots of them are white. Lots of them are Christian. Well over 50%, close to 60% are male. Over 50% are retired. And of course, if you got that many retirees, a bunch of them are also going to be over 65. Now, this is where a lot of people get twisted up. A lot of people think that these folks are really poor, working class white folks. You know, people have been, you know, using that drag, talking about that drama for I don't know how long. And my colleague Matt Barretto and I have been out there for just as long saying that that's not true. And here's another piece of proof for this stuff. So roughly 50% have incomes of at least $50,000 a year. Not 50,000, not all of them are 50,000 and below. This is at least $50,000 a year. And roughly 30% of them have at least a college degree. Now, to give you a little bit of context, roughly 35% of the population, the American population, 25 years or older, has a college degree. So these people aren't really that far off, right? 30% versus 35%. So where they live. Now, this is what's called a heat map. And the darker the circles or the darker the dots, the more dense the concentration of MAGA supporters. And look at where we are right up here in Seattle, the good old PNW, lots and lots and lots of MAGA supporters in Western Washington. Lots of MAGA supporters in Boston, New York City, LA, San Diego, San Francisco, Houston. So here's another, oh, wait a minute, I forgot. Chicago, Detroit. So this too puts to bed, at least we think, another misnomer that they're just all these rural folks. They are not. So these are their conspiratorial views. Now, I mean, we all know that they're conspiracy theorists, but nobody ever really talks about the extent to which they're conspiracy theorists. This chart right here, this figure, adds some flesh to those bones. So what they say is real Americans are losing freedom, right? Real Americans, I use air quotes, almost 90%. Our lives are controlled by secret plots, a little over 90%. The American way of life is disappearing. Went forward. It's disappearing. Close to 100%. Unknown actors are making big decisions. Close to 100%. And forces are changing our country for the worse. 100%. So these people really have this conspiratorial. So what you see with Marjorie Taylor Greene and everything she's saying, that's not just confined to her, right? That's about this MAGA group as a whole. This is about this MAGA movement as a whole. Okay. MAGA supporters' views on race. Here we go. Slavery and discrimination make Black folks, make it hard for Black folks to work their way up, right? You see roughly 85% disagree with that. Blacks have gotten less than they deserve. Roughly 82% disagree with that. Blacks could be just as well off as whites. Almost 75% believe that if they tried. Almost 75% believe that to be true. More Blacks could get off welfare and get a job if they tried. Almost about 88%. And Blacks should work their way up like other minorities, roughly 95%. So that, what we just covered right now, is what social scientists call a new racism or modern racism. It's not the old kind of racism where these folks believe that Black folks just aren't as morally good or upstanding as whites, or that Black folks are just straight up lazy or unpatriotic or prone to violence, because people aren't really going to answer those questions. The new racism, many political scientists would argue, is that it's all about this perceived unwillingness to adhere to American core values, one of which is the Protestant work ethic. And the last slide, I think this is the last slide. Okay, so who is responsible? Who MAGA supporters held responsible for the Capitol riots? So Trump, you see close to, around 73% don't believe Trump has or bears any responsibility. We go over here to Antifa, however, you get roughly, 60% that believe that Antifa has a great deal of responsibility for it. If you go down to even a lot, we're talking roughly 75, 77%. So what I'm trying to say is I have some more slides in reserve. Well, I don't have them right now, but I will tell you to go to the website. It's called the MAGA study. Just go tap that in and you'll go right to the website. It's got a lot of the data and a lot of the summaries that we made. But suffice it to say that what we saw is what we believed, or is to quote the late Denny Green, football coach Denny Green, they are who we thought they were. And I'll stop there.
Chris, I think that's really significant. I would just add this is also, Chris, I failed to mention one of the other things that distinguishes you. You're one of the very few scholars who back in 2016 predicted Trump's victory. And at that time, everybody was saying, well, the reason Trump beat Hillary is because the Democrats failed to really connect with traditional working class, blue-collar Democrats who were down on their luck post-Great Recession, and it was all about the economy. And you said, no, it's not about the economy, actually. It's about historic and deep-seated racism in many ways, or as you put, a great fear that these folks are losing an America they love. And that's what Trump has brilliantly tapped into. And, before I go to Lance, I want both of you to talk about this. A lot of what is fueling these MAGA folks is what we're calling the big lie. It's astounding how many tens of millions of them, as you point out, actually believe this election was stolen. Talk about what is fueling that sort of what to us seems like a surreal mythology. And then I want Lance, you to jump in as well.
So basically what's fueling this, Kenan, and everyone out there is at bottom, they want Trump in office by hook or by crook. They don't care how. They just want him as their president. And let me tell you why. They see Trump as he's a vessel. He's the last thing standing between them, that is to say, quote unquote, real Americans, and the rest of us. That is to say, progressive, people of color, feminists, and immigrants, right? So if you can't check these boxes, white, male, middle class or better off, Christian, native born, straight, you can't check all those boxes, congratulations, you are not a real American. So they see Trump as a means to an end. It's not so much about Trump. They see him as a means to an end. They see him as, the last thing, the last man standing, if you will, that's going to protect them against the rest of us. And in this way, they're very pragmatic. They don't care how it happens. They just want to make it happen. That's why they believe in the quote unquote big lie, because they have to believe it.
But Lance, I want you to jump in here because you're the real expert on communication. And I would actually argue this big lie isn't something that just seems like a convenience. From what we're hearing, there are tens of millions of Americans who absolutely fervently believe the election was stolen. Talk about what's driving that and give us some historic context, if you would, Lance.
Well, I think there are several things driving it. One is that people are encouraged to feel however they want to feel about the reality that they would like to create. And so this is a better reality for that many Americans. I think a second factor is that there are political leaders, authorities, so to speak, who are encouraging that. Look at the number of members of Congress who challenged the election. And there would have been more without the riot and the insurrection. But the third factor is that why are there so many allegedly responsible Republican enablers for this? And that is a result of a 40-year Republican project that dates well before Donald Trump ever appeared on the scene to create the conditions for minority rule in America. There have been voter suppression measures in a number of states that have restricted the vote. And it was only because Trump's so annoyed and scared so many left-leaning voters that you got massive turnout, thanks to also the mobilization efforts of Stacey Abrams and others, that you actually had Joe Biden elected as president. So had the voter suppression measures in many, many states worked, they couldn't have lost the election. And now what are they going to do to make sure that they will never lose another one? Is that they are doubling down on voter suppression. So if I had one slide to show you all, it would be a map of the United States showing that there are 45 states with new and improved voter suppression laws being considered. And there are 33 states with 165 different voter suppression laws that have some chance of passing. And with the support of the judiciary, which is part of the voter suppression and minority rule project going back to the 1980s, the judiciary can declare these as constitutional. And so we will end up, if this project is completed and it's well on track in the next couple of years before the 2022 elections, to finish off democracy in America, if by democracy we mean majority rule.
I think there's no more profound issue, frankly, than what's happening right now. As anyone who's been following, I think it's 300 some separate state laws. And, to try and fight that, you have House Resolution 1, you have the John Lewis Voting Rights Act. Will those pass on a federal level? But before we get into that, I want to go back, though, and it's to Chris's earlier slide, the number of people who really buy in to total conspiracy theories. This isn't just a small fringe, and your expertise in communication and social media. Give us some context for how social media has changed the landscape and influences this kind of thinking.
Well, let me put that in a slightly larger context, and then I'll home in on the specific question about social media. But let's think about where facts and beliefs come from in a complex society like ours. Facts are not true because you can prove that this policy is going to work better than that policy. In fact, we get a lot of bad policies that don't work well at all, despite the PR. But authorities structure our range of acceptable beliefs. And once government has been attacked and the authority of government has been undermined to the extent that it had been well before social media came on the scene, people begin to mistrust government and mistrust authorities, and then turn to other sources of information for their beliefs and understandings. So part of it is the sort of delegitimation of authoritative information. That's been a long-standing project going back over the last 40 years. But the role of social media is of course critical, because you get the widespread of alternative facts, as the Trump administration so affectionately referred to them, our facts that work for us. And so when you begin to spread alternative facts, social media is capable of the distribution of misinformation and disinformation on a scale that was once only available to the mass media. And then the second wrinkle, I think, in the social media story is that I just read a study actually that said that there were 20, I mean, count them, of all this disinformation, lies, and craziness that's spreading, there were 20 social media accounts that were responsible for the largest spread of disinformation about the election, about COVID, and about a number of other things. And most of those accounts were Donald Trump and his family and his supporters and allies. And so here's how that works. Trump is trolling all the time, looking for stuff that he thinks is going to be popular among his base that may exist only on the farthest corners of the internet, but he suddenly has a massive social media audience, or had until Facebook and Twitter shut him down. We'll see about how that goes. And then he brings them into public visibility and spreads them wildly. So his election conspiracy and the voting machine, remember the voting machine idea that had something to do with Hugo Chavez and Venezuela? That was a good one. It turns out it doesn't matter how wacky that is, it's how many people will share it and at least appear to believe it. So some of those wildest fantasies about the election being rigged were shared from Trump's Facebook and Twitter accounts over 100 million times. So he was able to generate over 100 million interactions from those once very obscure and fringe beliefs.
But something I would inject, and Chris, I want you to jump in here. It used to be, though, that even though the right has loved to attack so-called establishment or mainstream press, most Americans still generally gave credence, whether it's the news networks, whether it's AP, the New York Times. But it seems under Trump, this fake news moniker really has started to stick in strange ways. And in addition, his use of Twitter, it seems like the first time we've had a president who was almost exclusively able to ignore traditional press to get his message out and just tweet like crazy, and it worked. I mean, put that in, again, some context, and what is that the future of communication in America? And what does that bode?
Well, I can put in some theoretical context, but the applied stuff, the more substantive stuff, I'll defer to Lance when it comes to comms. But look, the bottom line is these people believe what they need to believe. And this is once again driven by this reactionary sentiment that they hold. As you mentioned earlier, they feel like they're losing their America, and they will do everything and anything to maintain control. just as a rule, when it comes to cognitive psychology, people are a lot more sensitive to losses, perceived losses, than gains. And it's even more the case when it comes to the political right. And the further you go on the right, the more sensitive they are to losses. And so they feel like they're losing their country with the demographic change and cultural change. And they need to do everything and anything to get it back. And if that includes hearing crazy stuff from Fox News or from The Blaze or from Stormfront, then whatever, right? They're okay with that because they need to believe that. Lance?
I mean, to the question, I agree with all that. These are beliefs of convenience. I mean, I'm sure some people get cranked out on really feeling the truth of these things, but in a way, it doesn't matter. What matters is how prominently featured are these kinds of understandings and who is promoting them. And as I said in the first comment, we have prominent members of Congress promoting them, and they're being elected on the basis of these things. So our entire public discourse has become warped in extreme ways. How to get that back? This gets back to the Republican Minority Rule Project. I mean, you know, part of that project is attacking the credibility of government. You know, back in the 80s, Ronald Reagan said the 9 most dangerous and feared words in the English language are "I'm from the government and I'm here to help." So over the years, Americans have come to mistrust government, and as money has further corrupted government, believe that all politicians are corrupt, and so it doesn't matter who you elect. And that undermines the basis of communication itself, because who are you going to believe in that context? So I think that the restoration of democracy, the rule of law, and equality as principles of American political culture are the only paths back to something like sane public communication. That doesn't mean there won't be disagreements. Sure there will, but the question is, will the disagreements be over things like, did a dead guy in Venezuela corrupt the voting machines that swung the election?
You know, and that leads to a topic maybe for a little later this evening, but is there a role for the government to have more oversight in at least social media? But before we go there, I want to circle back to the Republican Party. And Chris, in your study, I think, you know, Trump got, I believe it was 74 million votes. I think it was 6 or 7 million more votes than 4 years ago. How do you break that huge group of the electorate down in terms of, are a majority of them MAGA folks? Are they part of the conspiracy theorist and the big lie? Or are some of them traditional pro-business, anti-regulation Republicans who are just along for the ride? Do you have a sort of sense how it breaks down and what it bodes for the Republican Party at this moment in time?
Yeah, right off the top of my head, I would say that, well, first of all, he got 63 million votes last time and 74 at this time. So his vote tally increased by 11 million votes, which is
sobering.
Yeah, sobering, scary, bracing. And so now how they break down. So the research that I've conducted and a couple other people's research has validated what my colleague and I have done. Roughly 50% of registered Republicans are MAGA supporters, 50%, 50. Now there's another 40% that are the more establishment kinds of Republicans, right? You know, like you said, pro-business, you know, you have some social conservatives in that camp, you know, some hawks in that camp as well. And then you have 10% of the Republican electorate are the never Trumpers and the Lincoln Project Republicans, right? Who were just like done with Trump. So that's roughly how that breaks down. Now, how this bodes for the future of the Republican Party, here's the problem, right? That wing of the party is going to continue to dominate the Republican Party as long as it feels threatened. As long as they're concerned with demographic change and cultural change, They're going to run the Republican Party because it's easier to mobilize people off of what's called negative affect. That wing of the party is going to continue to dominate than it is based on positive affect. And one of the things that worked to Democrats' advantage, for once, they decided to run on negative affect by painting Trump as an existential threat, right? For white people, he was a threat, existential threat to democracy, the suburban white folks who used to vote Republican. But for people of color, he was an existential threat to the race, right? And that latter part, I've shown in some of my own research, that is true. You paint Trump as an existential threat to race, turns Black people out. You paint him as a threat to class, working class voters, doesn't do anything to mobilize Black people. So as far as the Republican Party writ large, as long as that wing of the party, that 50% feels like they're under threat, they're not going anyplace.
But if you have a Republican Party that's already a minority party, and then it's that divided, how does that bode for the Republican Party going forward?
Well, because the bottom line is that you're still going to get your more establishment types that are going to reluctantly vote the ticket. But it's going to be that 50% that's going to run the party. Right. And they're going to continue to run the party, but they're going to continue to turn out. Look, as Lance can vouch, right? Lance has been in this game longer than I have. Republicans and conservatives are typically lower in number than any other grouping of on the political spectrum, right? But you know why they're so successful? They punch above their weight. Why do they punch above their weight? Because they're scared and angry and anxious. That's why. They're able to mobilize in much greater numbers.
Well, let me add just a piece to that, which I agree with. But to go back to the voter suppression project, which again, I think we can't underestimate, is if you can't win elections, you need to suppress the vote. So you will be able to win elections. And last week, we heard an interesting argument in the Supreme Court on an early trial balloon of voter suppression laws, this one coming from Arizona. And Justice Amy Coney Barrett asked one of the lawyers on the case, but how can you say that these laws will not harm anyone? And he finally was stumped by that question, which is interesting because this is allegedly a lawyer arguing before the Supreme Court. And he said, it will harm the Republican Party because we'll never win an election without them. And you also heard the same thing coming from Lindsey Graham, and you've heard a number of prominent Republicans basically saying, we can't win an election unless we suppress the vote. Now, that's an interesting statement because, well, that means that you aren't considering finding any issues that are more popular, right? That's not an option. So if that's not an option, then you have to rig the elections.
Kenan, let me comment on what Lance just said. And that suppressing the vote, Lance, and everyone else, it kills two birds with one stone. One, for the functional piece of it, yeah, it suppresses the vote, so it makes it harder for more progressives to win and people of color to win, but it also pleases the base.
Exactly.
Two birds with one stone.
Exactly.
Right. No, I think, though, that I want to just circle back for a minute, though, to all of these state laws. I mean, apparently one of the particularly sort of bizarre and sick ones is in Georgia. They want to make it illegal to provide food or water to voters standing in line to vote. And I think, they are freaked out what happened in Georgia, and, not just Biden winning, but picking up 2 Senate seats. So, a lot of people see this as a promising future, but if we're up against all of these efforts at blatant voter suppression, how do both of you, sort of putting on your political science and social science hats, read that? I mean, what does that mean, and how likely is it all of these laws will actually be enacted?
I'll let you go with that one first, Lance. I'll comment.
Well, I think it's quite likely that a number of them will be enacted. Whether it's enough to tip the balance, we will only have to wait and see. But I think that beyond the question of how many of these laws is going to be reenacted is the question of what are the prospects for the Democrats, who have a very, very frail majority right now to pass a new round of safe election laws, which they're trying. HR 1, as you mentioned, is a list of pretty good laws that would guarantee equal access to voting.
Can you describe some of those? Do you know some of the content there, Lance?
Automatic voter registration, automatic provisions for mail balloting. I mean, just a couple, but there's a long list. Oh, how about this one? Ending gerrymandering by appointing independent commissions of the sort that very few states have to draw fair voting districts. Iowa, for example, is a state that has independent commissions, but the rest of the states have figured out that it's a game. It's not about democracy. It's about power and it's about winning. It's not about democracy. We don't have a committee or an agency or a bureaucracy to protect democracy. Isn't that interesting? Whoops, we forgot that. So since we don't have any function for the protection of democracy, it's all up for grabs. And so we now have a Supreme Court that is exceedingly partisan, probably as partisan as any Supreme Court since before the Great Depression or during the Depression. And how do we change that? And since they are responsible, they're the referees in the democracy game, how do we change that? Well, finally, it appears the Democrats are getting into the game of appointing the kinds of justices. I mean, they're partisan too, but at least they are more likely to come down on the side of including all the citizens in this democracy.
The right to vote, what a novel.
What a crazy idea in a democracy, right?
So, but let me just comment on that real quick, Lance. I mean, great exposition. But doesn't Germany have something akin to an agency of some kind that's assigned to protect democracy?
They absolutely do, and of course, Germany has a special history, and it's from that special history that the Federal Bureau for the Protection of the Constitution, but the Constitution is especially clear in terms of harming citizens and preventing imbalances in participation or discrimination against citizens. And so, yes, there is an agency that is, I hesitate to say like the FBI, but it does have surveillance and police powers. And right now, the leading right-wing party in Germany, the opposition radical right party, the Alternative for Deutschland, is under surveillance by this agency because they have harmed citizens. So that means that their phones can be tapped, that meetings can be infiltrated, and indeed, at some point, the party itself could be certified. I mean, if you break down the U.S., which unfortunately doesn't have a proportional representation system, it would be rather like the MAGA party would be up for being outlawed in the U.S. if we had that kind of provision.
You know, I want to turn to some of our town hall audience questions. Glenn Young asked, would you consider the big lie about Reconstruction that led to Jim Crow similar to the great lies currently that attacking voting where Black votes determine the outcome of elections?
I'm not sure what the big lie is he's referring to when it comes to Reconstruction.
No, okay.
I'm not clear on that, right? If I got some clarity on that, I can answer that. I'm not sure what the referent is when it comes to Lance. You might have a better idea what's going on with that question.
Well, I'm not 100% clear, but I do think that going back to Reconstruction for just a moment is a good idea, because there's continuous reference today by Republicans to the Party of Lincoln, but the Party of Lincoln died in 1877, and it was over Reconstruction. And it was over a contested election, which, unlike this fake contested election that we've just been through, actually was contested to the extent that several states sent, 2 slates of delegates to the final delegate count in Congress, and so they couldn't decide. They appointed a commission, which is what you may recall Ted Cruz wanted to do for this. Oh, let's have a commission, and we'll figure out who the members should be, and then they'll decide who won the election. Well, they did that in 1877, and they still couldn't decide. Turns out Ted Cruz missed a couple of pieces of history along the way. And when they couldn't decide, even with an independent commission, Rutherford B. Hayes, who was the first non-Lincoln Republican, basically went to Congress and said, let's make a deal. I will let you guys do whatever you want in your states. So that gave rise to the Democratic Party in the Jim Crow South until the 1950s and 60s. And he got to be president. And that's a chapter in history. And yet here's Ted Cruz saying, let's do that again.
So let me speak on that. So you're largely right, but the Republican Party, I mean, let's keep it real. All the way through the 1960s, the Republican parties, that was the more progressive of the two parties, right? You had more Republicans that voted for the Civil Rights Act than you did Democrats, right?
Yeah, absolutely.
Right. So I mean, so the party of Lincoln that free, and let's not even talk about the whole purpose behind freeing the slaves. That was really about military necessity than anything else. So when people say, it was the party of Lincoln. They still want to make this argument and run that drag. I totally agree. And Jim Crow, so the Hayes-Tilden Compromise, you're right, Lance, that was the beginning of Jim Crow. No question about that. They pulled the military out and they just let them, do whatever they wanted to do during this period of redemption. No question about that. But I do think that there is another parallel here between what's going on now and what happened during Reconstruction is this idea that change is happening too fast, right? We want to slow things down. That's why you get Jim Crow. That's why you get redemption. And we're seeing the same thing happen right now. And we've seen it, again, most recently begin with Obama, right? Because if we don't have Obama, we don't get Trump. They saw Obama, the first non-white president. It scared the bejesus, and I'm trying to keep this clean, y'all. It scared the bejesus out of a lot of white folks, right? And so now we get Trump as a consequence.
I want to follow, though, on that because there is still, and this is something you talked a little bit about earlier, and that is Trumpism, with or without Donald Trump. If Trump were to go away, does Trumpism continue? And is that, how alarmed are you, Chris, by the findings of your study?
Man, let me tell you something. Trumpism's been here from the very beginning in some way, shape, or form since the founding of the Republic. Let's just get that straight, right? It's always been here. And what we can call Trumpism is what I call in my own stuff, is status threat, right? Which is part of a larger theory of what I call reactionary politics. And part of that is that these people have this Manichaean worldview. It's good versus evil, and clearly they're the good side and all the rest of us are evil. So that's why they have such a hard time compromising. And it has always been this way. Anytime there's any sort of racial progress, you can bet your bottom dollar on it, there's going to be some racial regress. Right? There's going to be retrenchment that is going to happen. It is inevitable, right? Much in the same way people saw Obama's election as racial progress, right? Then you get Trump as sort of racial retrenchment. And it's not going anyplace. Trumpism or this status threat or reactionary politics, it will outlive Trump. And indeed, it might outlive all of us.
And that's scary. But Lance, I want to actually quote you. There's a terrific article that Lance wrote last month, We the People, Time for Truth About Democracy in America. It's a Center for Journalism, Media, and Democracy paper that you're a fellow on. Very insightful. One of your quotes is, Trump did not invent the reactionary creed that's echoing through MAGA. He merely decoded it and helped bring it into the open for all to see. Would you expand on that?
Sure. And by the way, that paper is available for free on the Center for Journalism, Media, and Democracy website. So you can just search for that and you'll find it.
It's a good read. I highly recommend it. Yeah.
But if you go back to the beginning of the Minority Rule project that the Republicans launched when they realized that they'd never win another election based on their issues. I mean, they had a coalition of issues, Christian evangelicals, gun lovers, anti-abortion, but it didn't add up enough. And so you began with coded racism. So Reagan and the welfare Cadillac queen, right? What is that? What is that? And so you begin to accomplish several things with those kinds of coded language. First of all, it's anti-government. We don't need welfare, because if people would just get jobs, Chris's study showed that that's still a very prominent belief, that these people would get jobs. And so you began the coded talk, and then Trump simply realized, but wait a minute, there's more people out there than the original Republican coalition mobilized. And with the use of the internet and the openness about racism and authoritarianism, I can bring those people out. And he did. So he expanded the Republican base. It turns out, as Chris also said, he got one of the reasons he thinks he won is because he got the most votes ever for a president in American history, except for Joe Biden this time. So he should have won by his accounting system, and we all know what his accounting system is like. So I think that the idea now is that we have a blatant racist party in the United States that would probably rather go back to the more polite theft of democracy by suppressing the vote and appointing court justices that will uphold that as legal. But now they've created a monster in a way, and the Republican Party has to deal with that monster. And it'll be interesting to see how that goes.
I mean, to your point, though, your last line is what Trump did is he brought this out in the open for all to see. And Chris, you described Trump's election as having a silver lining for the same reason, I believe. I mean, I'd like you to.
Yeah, I said this a long time ago, right? 5 years ago now, that I think it could have a silver lining because, as Lance said, it brings all of this stuff to the surface, right? No hiding about this anymore, right? You can't say, it's hard for people to gaslight like people like me on racism, because I used to have people be like, are you sure that's right? Is somebody really going to credibly say that now? Or sexism, right? Or any of this stuff. But there's also, and this is one thing I did not discuss in the piece in American Prospect that I think you're referring to, is the stress test that is given American democracy. I mean, because we all take it for granted.
That's right.
But this guy and his administration put American democracy to a test. And so we so far survived it, but barely. And just think about what it took for this guy to lose. Let's just think about this in context, right?
Mm-hmm.
It took a once-in-a-century pandemic, a cratering economy, and an old, moderate white man to beat him. If one removes any one of those components, we're in Trump's second term.
I mean, that is alarming and pessimistic, and I want to be a little forward-looking and see if there are any areas for hope. But let's go back to your point. How much trouble in March of 2021 is American democracy in?
Lance, you want to take this one?
Well, it seems to me that there's good news and bad news possibly on the horizon. I mean, first of all, I think I would like to say that this is a very precarious moment. I mean, if you think about the number of crazies running around with guns and taking over state capitals and plotting to kidnap governors, one assassination could turn the balance of this government. One. And we've been through eras of assassinations in the past with the devastating effects that they've had. So I'm cautious, but I also would like to introduce just a ray of optimism here and suggest that because Trump has made the racism and the crudeness of public life so blatant, he may lose some Republican voters. And the question is, and this is where I'm not sure that it's good news, will the Democrats pick them up? Mm-hmm. And if they do pick them up, will it turn into more members of Congress like Joe Manchin, mm-hmm. right, who now holds tremendous power? I mean, they could pass H.R. 1 if they had a couple, if Kristen Sinema and Joe Manchin were willing to overturn the filibuster, you could pass that law. Whether the courts will uphold it is another question, but you could pass H.R. 1 and introduce a latest effort to establish inclusive citizens' rights in this country.
Right. Can I follow on that actually with some more audience questions?
Can I just?
Yeah, Chris, jump in. Yeah.
Just let me comment just very quickly on that. Lance, I mean, you hit the nail around the head. But the problem is if they start skewing, if the Democrats start trying to reach out to disaffected Trump voters, that's going to move them further to the middle, and that's going to alienate people of color.
Exactly.
Yeah. So Nick Licata, who many people know, former Seattle City Council member, he says, aside from H.R. 1, what should the Democrats do to prevent the MAGA movement from winning control of Congress? So I guess
Actually, I have one quick response to that: lock them up. But Chris may have a more nuanced response.
No, that's actually right up my alley, Lance. Wow, that's a good question.
Well, I mean, that does, we haven't really, but what's happening today and looking into, what happened on January 6th and the collaboration of some elected officials.
So, in my humble opinion, I think that the Democrats need to continue to scare their constituents, with good reason, right? For everything we've been discussing tonight. As Lance said, American democracy is in a real position of precarity right now. I mean, we are barely hanging on, right? So it's not like the Democrats have to make anything up. This is all happening, right? And for all the reasons that Lance mentioned, you have these Republican public officials who are complicit in this mess, right? Now, they're complicit for cynical reasons, right? They know better, but they know these people will vote them out of office at the very least if they don't lynch them, right? So I think that Democrats need to double down and just say, hey, look, the Republican Party is still a problem, and Trump is just hanging around the fringes right now. He's still very much a political actor and player, right? He's still pulling the strings of the Republican Party. So in my humble opinion, I think that the Democrats, if they, by hook or by crook, it needs to keep this coalition together. And if they need to resort to negative affect, fear, anger, and anxiety, well, got us this far so far, they need to keep it up.
I want to turn in sort of the final moments here to some prescriptive, maybe hopeful things that, we do have midterm elections coming up, and, the Democratic majority in both houses is precarious, and traditionally the party in power does badly in midterms. But we also have something rather extraordinary happening right now in Congress, which is this massive $1.9 trillion COVID relief bill, which is going to have an extraordinary amount of impact on working Americans, on education, providing childcare. I mean, there's huge things in it that a lot of people don't realize that are going to truly hit the ground and impact Americans, particularly a lot of Republican districts, which are hurting the most, ironically. Polls show 60% of Republicans favor this. So it would be interesting as Republican members of Congress run home who voted or voting against it. Are they just going to talk about, Dr. Seuss, I mean, but, so again, putting this moment in time in a little bit of perspective, do you see hope? We haven't even gotten into COVID, which, hopefully with the vaccines, we're going to start to get ahead of it in the coming months. Where from here for both of you, and what can folks listening do or take hope in?
Lance, I'll defer to you on this one.
Well, I'll let you wind it up, Chris. There are a couple of things that I think we can do. One is really focus on democracy and see if we can remember what it means. I mean, there's back to Chris's point about the Democrats not scaring us enough, because I think that people don't really understand what democracy might look like if it was actually being practiced in this country. I mean, people would start getting more of what they want from government and maybe restore the trust in government and the support for government. But right now, the Republicans may have to go home and face the music, but I don't think so, because they have developed the highly professionalized blame game. And all they want to do is make Biden look bad and throw as many obstacles in front of as many of his policies as possible, keep the filibuster alive, and then go home and say, see, you elected them and they couldn't deliver. So I think that that's what they run on, because they don't have a policy. Really, there's no Republican policy that appeals to more than 40% of this country. None, not one. Name one, and I would be surprised. So given that, they can only make the Democrats look bad, continue to attack government as a bad thing that produces dependency. I mean, children shouldn't get food programs because it will make them grow up dependent on government. I mean, seriously, you hear Republicans say things like this. So I think that there is a sense, and of course, Fox News and a lot of social media sites are amplifying the Dr. Seuss and the cancel culture, and you just saw the CPAC meetings from earlier, and so that there is this culture of obstructionism that somehow works for them because they can't offer anything that people actually want, that a majority of people actually want.
So, what's your advice to folks listening? What can folks do?
Send money to Stacey Abrams.
Okay, fair fight.
I like that. I like that, Lance. I don't know how I can top that. All I'll say to try to end on this note, it's really hard for me to be positive in this moment, given everything we've discussed. But one thing I will say is that this is an opportunity for America to really find out who we are as a country, right? Are we who we claim to be? And so that's about as good as I can get or I can muster right now. Are we who we really think we are and claim to be? So this is a real opportunity. You guys, this is an inflection point like few others we've ever experienced in this country. And we have the good fortune, and I do mean good fortune, of living through this and experiencing this, because we can actually do something about it. We can actually do something about it. We have some agency, and we don't take this for granted anymore. So the bottom line is positive. If this country is who it claims and what it claims to be, then that's fantastic. That's great. It'll make it better for everybody. But if we're not who we claim to be, things are going to get bad. And when I say this is an inflection point, I'm talking about this is not going to take a number of years to materialize. It's either going to get a whole lot better fast, or it's going to get a whole lot worse fast, right? So whatever is going to come, it's going to come quick.
Well, I can't think of a more both inspiring and perhaps sobering point to end on. Chris, Lance, terrific conversation, and I hope we continue it. And a special thanks to our audience and to Town Hall as always. And Candace, thanks again for hosting this.
Thanks, Kenan.
Thanks, everybody.
Lance, thank you, Chris.
Lance, when you gonna invite me over, man? That looks pretty cozy.
Well, I'll have you over. Beer's cold.
On behalf of Town Hall, I just want to say a huge thank you to all three of you.
Olivia.
Thank you for sharing everything that you did tonight. If you found this program interesting, keep an eye on our website. We have lots more programs, on a lot of different topics. And have a great evening. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Yes.
Good night.
Good night.
Night.